The forest is awake. What time is it where you are? And from where do you listen? Subscribe and hear what hides in the dark. I pulled into the campground just before sunset, expecting the usual. A few quiet families roasting marshmallows, maybe a couple of seasoned hikers turning in early. Instead, I was greeted by the clamor of loud music echoing off the tree line. The source? A cluster of tents circled around a blazing fire where a group of frat boys hollered and laughed like they had the whole place to themselves. Every so often, other campers peeked out of their tents, uneasy and clearly wishing these guys would tone it down. I couldn't blame them. Noise doesn't just shatter the calm of a campsite. It draws attention from things best left undisturbed. Out here, folks whisper about the ghost cats. Those local mountain lions that are known to slip into camps without warning. I'd seen enough tracks in eerily close proximity to sleeping bags to know these stories were more than rumors. I parked my rig a little ways off and walked over, picking my path carefully around scattered coolers and folding chairs. As I got close, the frat boys paused their banter, giving me that half-attentive look. They were mostly older teens or early 20-somethings, still buzzing with alcohol and late-night bravado. Evening, I started, trying to keep it friendly but firm. I'm the ranger on duty. Got some other campers worried you're attracting unwanted attention. I motioned toward the looming tree line. These woods have a reputation, and it's not for the best sing-alongs. They laughed it off at first, so I leaned in, lowering my voice. I described how mountain lions sometimes stalk the perimeter of noisy camps, how you won't spot them until they're practically brushing against your tent walls. I explained how we call them ghost cats because of their uncanny silence, the way they seem to appear out of nowhere. They sobered up a bit. A couple exchanged uncertain glances, but one just shrugged, muttering that they'd keep it down. I issued a final warning anyway. Stay quiet, don't wander off, and if they heard anything odd outside in the dark, make no sound. I only hoped they'd actually listen. Once I'd done all I could, I headed back to the station. My buddy Jim was there, flipping through some old wildlife photos. He raised an eyebrow when I told him about the frat boys. Let me guess. Blasting music, ignoring every rule we've got, right? He said, clearly unimpressed. Bingo, I replied. And they're not taking the mountain lion threat seriously. He let out a quiet laugh that contained zero humor. We both knew this was more than a minor annoyance. If something did happen, we'd be the ones hauling them out or dealing with an injured cat that got too comfortable around humans. That's when we started talking about a plan. Not to harm anyone, obviously, but to rattle them enough that they'd finally grasp the gravity of a place like this. Jim reminded me about the old lion pelt in our interpretive center. Used it once or twice for educational tours, though it always gave me the creeps. Its glass eyes caught the light in this unnerving way, like it was still alive. We also had night vision goggles stashed away, thanks to a budget splurge before the new fiscal year. Perfect for sneaking around in the dark, unseen by unsuspecting campers. Over the next half hour, we pieced together a strategy. Fake prints, hidden growls, and a well-timed appearance of a lion silhouette. It might just be the jolt they needed to pack up, or, at the very least, dial down the party volume. Grabbing the pelt from a dusty storage closet, I noticed the faint musty smell of fur, mixed with something almost medicinal. I ran my hand over the stiff mane, shivering at how realistic it still felt. Next, we tested the night vision goggles. Even in the dim station lights, they turned everything into an eerie green that made my pulse spike. By the time we had our gear ready, the sun had slipped below the horizon. The woods outside transformed into a dark maze. I had this sense that the frat boys, oblivious in their tents, were about to discover that being out here isn't just a carefree getaway. If they refused to respect the campground's unspoken rules, well, we'd give them a night they wouldn't forget. Jim killed the overhead lights as we locked up. We checked our plan one last time, and I took a breath, settling my nerves. We were about to sneak into that campsite, loaded with props, and a fair share of wild imagination. In the back of my mind, I thought about the actual ghost cats prowling these hills. I hoped we wouldn't run into a real one while pulling our prank. It's one thing to frighten a few campers. It's another to come face to face with the genuine article. Still, I felt this rush of adrenaline as we set off into the darkness. Maybe it was the satisfaction of delivering a wake-up call. Or maybe it was just that strange, hushed energy you feel whenever you realize you're not at the top of the food chain out here. Either way, there was no turning back. We had our plan, and we were committed to seeing it through. The night was only getting darker, and the silent woods seemed to hold their breath, waiting for whatever came next. I hunched down in the cramped front seat of our Jeep, double-checking that the lion pelt was still tucked out of sight. Outside, moonlight drenched the forest in faint silver, and every rustle of wind through the branches made me brace for actual movement. I couldn't help scanning the dark spaces between the trees, searching for any flicker of eyes that might belong to the real thing. My coworker Jim was fidgeting in the passenger seat, adjusting the small PA system we'd use for the recorded roars. "Ready?" he asked, voice low. "As I'll ever be," I replied, half hoping those frat kids were already asleep and half itching to put our plan into action. Either way, we needed to move quickly. The night sky was starless, and visibility would only get worse. I eased the Jeep toward their campsite, headlights off to keep our approach silent. Stopping a good distance away, we slipped out and quietly shut the doors. The path under our boots was damp from an earlier drizzle, which made our footfalls softer, but also gave the soil a perfect texture for stamping fake tracks. One by one, we planted oversized paw prints in the mud, making sure to press deeply near the tents. Every so often, we paused to listen, worried someone inside might stir and peek outside, but all we heard was the faint crackle of a dying fire. Next, Jim propped the lion pelt onto two sturdy sticks we'd duct-taped together. Seen straight on, it was eerily convincing. Massive head, snarling mouth, and the kind of glassy eyes that appear to stare into your soul. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting an actual animal to emerge, drawn by the uncanny shape. With the pelt set up, we turned to the other part of our plan, the roars. We'd preloaded the PA system with a series of snarls and growls from real mountain lion recordings. Jim started them at a low volume from across the clearing. The first noise rumbled through the darkness like a threat, and I could almost sense the campers tensing in their tents. A second roar followed, echoing off the surrounding trees, making it sound as if multiple predators were encircling the area. I slipped back into the Jeep and carefully flicked on the headlights, aiming them so that they backlit the pelt. From the angle of the beam, it looked like a living, breathing cat pacing along the outskirts of the camp. Jim shouted from behind a bush, "Stay in your tents," though his voice shook with just enough panic to convince anyone he was facing a genuine attack. "She's moving around us," he hollered, layering more drama into the moment. Then he bellowed, "There's another one." The reaction inside those tents was instant. I heard muffled cries, frantic rustling, and the scrape of tent zippers being yanked shut again. My own heartbeat thudded as I realized how convincing this whole thing probably looked and sounded from their perspective. In the glare of the headlights, the pelt's silhouette shifted, as though it was preparing to leap at any second. I killed the lights in one sudden click. Darkness swallowed the campsite. Jim dropped the sticks, and we wrested the lion pelt free. In under a minute, we tore back to the Jeep, adrenaline hammering through every vein. Once inside, I started the engine and didn't hold back, kicking up gravel as we made our getaway. Over the rumble of our tires, I thought I detected one final roar playing through the PA system, echoing behind us like a last warning. When dawn finally broke, the camp's radio chatter indicated that nobody had poked their head out until well into the morning. From our station windows we could imagine their pale faces and wide eyes discovering the huge paw prints scattered around, some alarmingly close to their tent doors. We heard they packed up not long after, throwing nervous glances over their shoulders at the looming forest. No doubt they were rattled to the core. Jim and I swapped glances, both relieved to hear they were safe, but also satisfied we'd given them something to think about. We'd wanted them to respect these woods, or at least remember that nature doesn't tolerate fools. From what we heard later, they told everyone about the mountain lion attack they'd barely survived. Maybe next time they'd remember that out here, silence can be the difference between a peaceful night and something far more dangerous. I could sense the isolation the instant our tires left the main road and hit that patchy excuse for gravel. Every bump felt magnified, like even the dirt wanted us to turn back. My boyfriend, who I'll call Dylan, tried to act like all this was part of the adventure, but I caught him glancing in the rearview mirror more than once, scanning the empty stretch behind us. We'd heard about this primitive camping spot from a friend of a friend, a place so remote you'd swear you were on another planet. No designated sites, no cell service, no company other than the occasional deer wandering past. We thought it'd be just the escape we needed. As the road got narrower and the trees pressed in, I began to wonder if we were going too far off grid. After what felt like an hour of muddy twists and turns, we noticed a truck pulled off by the side. Its hood was popped, but there was no sign of obvious trouble. No steam, no frantic waving. A woman leaned against the driver's door, not trying to flag us down or anything. She just stood there. We slowed a little, automatically ready to help, but Dylan gripped the wheel and shook his head. His gaze locked on her. The way she stared made me feel like she'd been expecting us specifically, like we were already part of some plan she had in mind. I tried to get a better look at her face, but Dylan pressed the gas, and suddenly, she was just a figure in the rearview mirror. I caught myself checking the side mirror, half expecting her to jump in her truck and follow. That didn't happen. Or at least not right then. We headed on, but the air inside our car felt heavy. Dylan said it was nothing, but I knew better. It took us another 10 or 15 minutes to find a place to pull off. The spot wasn't ideal. Mud clung to our boots, and we had to stomp around a bit to find a decent patch for the tent. Still, it was level enough, and we figured we'd be left alone. That was the whole point, right? We set up a small fire, both of us trying to shake off our uneasy start. I cracked a couple jokes about wanting s'mores, hoping that normal conversation might make everything feel safer. Then a car crawled by, a rusty old sedan with a driver who slowed to stare at us. I tried not to dwell on it. Maybe he was just curious. But when the same car came back a second time, lingering even longer, my pulse pounded. Dylan muttered something about folks trying to find dry land in this swampy mess. I nodded, but secretly I wasn't buying it. He circled back again. This time, I locked eyes with him for a split second. He didn't smile or wave, just kept his gaze fixed on us before he drove off. Dylan and I shared a look. Neither of us voiced what we were thinking. Maybe we should leave. But the idea of hauling all our stuff through slippery mud, only to have him follow our tracks, made that plan seem pointless. Dusk arrived, bringing the kind of silence that feels unnatural. Our tiny fire crackled in the clearing, but the dark pressed in from every side. We ate our hot dogs in tense silence, checking the road every few minutes, waiting to see headlights creeping by. When nothing else happened, we tried to call it a night. The moment we zipped ourselves into the tent, though, every rustle, every snap from the fire's dying embers, felt ominous. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, reminding myself that weird encounters happen sometimes, especially far from civilization. Dylan seemed tense too, tossing and turning, but we both tried to act like we were fine. Neither of us wanted to be the one to say, "Let's pack up right now." Not when we'd invested so much energy just getting there. The last thing I remember before drifting off was wishing the night would pass quickly, but deep down, I sensed things were about to get a whole lot worse. Night settled around us in a suffocating hush. I remember lying there, counting the seconds between the crackling embers of our dying fire and the distant rustle of undergrowth. Dylan's breathing was shallow. I could tell he was as on edge as I was, though neither of us admitted it. Sometime past midnight, must have been closer to 3 a.m., an awful noise tore through the silence. It was this warped combination of metal scraping across gravel and a machine trying to start up. It came in bursts, each one echoing through the trees. My chest tightened as I strained to figure out how close it was. Dylan quietly unzipped the tent window, just enough to peer out. The moonlight painted the clearing in pale light, but everything looked still. The sound must have been bouncing around the hills, or maybe it was closer than I realized. My mind was racing with questions I didn't dare say out loud. I heard Dylan whisper that it could be far away, but his voice wavered. It didn't sound like he believed that himself. I kept imagining shapes moving at the edge of the clearing, people lurking just out of sight. Usually I'd rationalize it all away, tell myself it was a weird echo, an animal, anything. But there was nothing familiar about that metallic grinding. A few minutes later, Dylan sat up and started rummaging through our gear. My pulse hammered as he pulled out the machete we'd packed. It was still wrapped in that plastic packaging because we never intended to use it for more than chopping brush. Seeing him carefully remove it in the middle of the night, in total silence, made me realize we were past the point of hoping this would all blow over. He motioned for me to get dressed quickly. No big speech, no debate. We both knew we needed to leave. We moved as quietly as possible, unzipping the tent and emerging into the cool night. My senses were in overdrive. My eyes jumped to every shifting shadow. My ears caught every twitch in the undergrowth. We started gathering our gear. In the weak moonlight, I almost tripped over an empty can I hadn't noticed before. I nudged Dylan, and he froze. We hadn't brought any beer, so it definitely wasn't ours. That realization sent a jolt of panic through me. Someone had been here, close enough to leave trash by our embers. We didn't bother taking time for a detailed cleanup. We crammed our sleeping bags into the trunk, tossed the tent on top, and locked ourselves in the car. Dylan checked the gas gauge. He'd been worried that whoever was out there might have siphoned our tank. Thankfully, we still had enough to get out of there. He fired up the engine and the headlights carved two stark beams through the dark. Every tree seemed like a potential hiding spot, and every bend in the muddy road threatened to reveal something we weren't ready to face. We kept our eyes peeled for movement as we barreled through puddles and slick patches, slipping a bit now and then, but never stopping. Once we finally got onto a more solid stretch of gravel, I let myself breathe a little. Dylan tried to make a joke, something about how a hybrid saved us from ending up in some horror movie. But even the humor felt forced. We were both still wired, scanning the roadside as if the woman by the truck, or that circling car might appear around the next bend. When we reached a main road, we didn't say much. Relief washed over us, but it was the kind that left a bitter aftertaste. We'd wanted isolation and ended up feeling hunted. Neither of us slept easily that night, and for the rest of the trip, we stuck to crowded campgrounds or cheap motels with bright lights in the parking lot. I couldn't believe how different everything looked when morning finally came, but that lingering sense of unease stayed with me. In a single night, our idea of a remote, peaceful getaway had been ripped apart by something, or someone, we never even got a good look at. Hi there, I'm Samantha, Sam, and I was a park ranger for 6 years. I won't specify where because I don't want to get in trouble. One of the people I worked with told me to read the other park ranger stories on here, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And hell, it's good to see someone being honest. It inspired me to share some of my own stories. People need to know what happens in the woods. I quit my job a couple of years ago. I couldn't deal with bottling up all the things I've seen. Nobody wants to talk about them, but I feel like I'm drowning in the memories of it all. So, I'm going to share them. I don't know if I'll be able to share everything. It might be too hard, but I'll give it a go. I hope this raises some awareness of the true dangers of the woods, and makes people consider their safety. I don't want people to think I'm copying someone or making these things up. I'm just sharing my stories and experiences. Let's get into it. This was my first weird experience as a junior ranger. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't friendly. I had just received a call about screams coming from deeper in the forest, off one of the more popular trails. This wasn't unusual. If you've heard a mountain lion, you know it can sound like a woman screaming. Just as I was about to set off, my chief at the time asked to come along. I found this odd because the job seemed too insignificant for his rank, but I brushed it off. I was new and figured maybe he wanted to check my progress. We set off, making small talk, and I was obviously trying to suck up a little. We were joking around when he made a quick remark about taking even small jobs seriously, because you never know what you'll find. That turned out to be some of the most valuable advice I ever got on this job, and I definitely learned my lesson later, but that's another story. We reached the area where the call originated, and headed north of the trail. We heard the screams, and it sounded like a mountain lion, but something was really off about it. We kept walking toward the noise. About 10 minutes in, all of a sudden, it was like every sound was sucked out of the woods. It was dead silent. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone deaf, but I looked at my chief and saw he had the same nervous expression on his face. By the way he was acting, it felt like he'd encountered this before, which I now know to be true. Just as quickly as the silence came, I started to hear a low buzzing, but it wasn't just a buzzing. I could feel it vibrating through my entire body, so much that my ears and jaw began to hurt. The best way I can describe it is like when you're getting your teeth drilled at the dentist, but worse. Even my vision started to vibrate, and as that happened, I swear I saw a black figure, about 7 feet tall, step out from behind the trees in front of me. It started letting out that same scream as it bent down and began crawling toward us. Naturally, I freaked the hell out and stepped back to run. My chief grabbed my arm hard, almost knocking me over, and put his other arm around me as he began to walk me out of the forest. Just as I was about to fight him and yell for us to run, he said in a calm voice, "Don't run, don't talk, don't look back, just keep walking." I did exactly what he said. He obviously knew something I didn't, and as much as I wanted to run, I didn't want to find out what would happen if I did. Those 10 minutes were excruciating. I could tell it was crawling behind us by the buzzing in my head and the faint wailing sound it made. I wanted to run so badly. Eventually, I think it ran off, because all the regular noise of the forest came back and the buzzing stopped. When we got back on the trail, I was shaking. I was in such shock I couldn't even cry. He let go of me and started walking back to the main base without saying a word about what happened. I started screaming at him, asking what the hell that thing was. He said, and yes, I remember this word for word, "There are things in these woods that have been here longer than us. Things we can't explain or get rid of. If you don't think you can handle that, you should pack your bags now." He kept walking and I followed behind, trying to make sense of what happened. I obviously stayed in the job. When it was good, it was really good. I met some amazing people, and I love nature, but in the end, the bad experiences outweighed the good, and I had to leave. Honestly, I wish I had left when he told me to pack my bags. I know this experience doesn't sound that scary in writing, but trust me, living through it was terrifying. And there are worse ones. Some of them are scarier, some are more explainable. I'm still debating whether to share all my stories. Maybe I'll see how I feel after posting this. I'd love to hear other people's experiences with the woods. Part 2. A lot of people seem to be interested in stairs found in the woods. I've seen a set of stairs in the woods once, and personally, it wasn't too scary, just a bit creepy. I know a couple of my friends in the force, a force to be reckoned with, have some stories about stairs that they've mentioned in passing. If and when I decide to contact them for permission, maybe I'll post those. I do, however, have a story about a ladder that I wish I could forget because just thinking about it gives me the creeps. My experience with the stairs is pretty tame, so I'll add another incident afterward. We were searching for a young girl who had wandered off. We found her. She's fine. The team was stretched out pretty far, so I was walking alone but within shouting distance of others. As I was walking, I saw a set of stairs. They sort of looked like they belonged there but also didn't. They were overgrown, like they might have been the steps to someone's house. But I realized there was no way someone had put them there recently. I figured I'd stumbled upon one of those mysterious stairs my coworkers had talked about. I thought I'd be terrified if I ever saw them, but I wasn't. I did, however, feel an urge to walk up them, like something was pulling me toward them. Maybe it was just the excitement of finally seeing them, or maybe something darker. Someone nearby called out that they'd found something, and it snapped me back to reality. I'm really glad they did. I'm not sure what would have happened if I'd gone up. We found the girl, and all was well. On the way back I mentioned to a partner that I had seen some stairs. She got worried and sort of grilled me about whether I touched or walked up them. I said no, and that was it. So, yeah, pretty tame. Nothing too intense. I'm not going to lie or overemphasize anything here. This next occurrence isn't about stairs, but it is about a ladder, which I'd say is pretty similar. This happened sometime during my first year as a park ranger, around the start of summer, when poison ivy really goes wild. We had to do weekly checks on the trails and the surrounding brush. My partner and I were assigned to check some of the less popular trails. We came to a smaller trail that forked for a couple of minutes, and then joined up again. Being the idiots we were, we split, planning to meet where it connects. We could still see each other through the brush in the middle, so we thought it was fine. He took the left path, and I took the right. As I was walking, keeping an eye out for ivy, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a large clearing in the middle of the trees. It looked man-made, perfectly round, as if someone had been maintaining it. There wasn't a single tree, bush, or even a weed. I was so focused on the lack of vegetation that I almost didn't notice the huge, unmistakable ladder standing right in the center. It was upright and leaning against absolutely nothing, like some unknown force was holding it. I looked up and saw a man at the top, wearing a business suit. It almost seemed comical, like he'd walked straight out of a corporate office. His head was tilted back, staring up at the sky, and his mouth was wide open. I couldn't get a clear view, so I called to him a few times. No response. I circled the ladder looking for wires or strings, hoping it was some sort of prank or art installation, but I found nothing. He looked like he was on display for some bizarre exhibition. I didn't know what else to do, and I couldn't see my partner, so I radioed him to come over. While waiting, I made the stupid decision to touch the ladder. I know, terrible idea. Don't touch weird crap you find in the woods. I got a weird feeling just before my hand reached it, but I brushed it off and touched it anyway. The moment I did, the man at the top snapped his neck in this horrifically contorted way to look at me, and let out an ungodly gasp, like he was drawing his last breath. His face was still warped in this gaping expression, eyelids and lips pulled back as though he were in perpetual shock. I stumbled back and grabbed my taser. Just then, I heard someone behind me, and I spun around, taser raised. It was my partner, hands in the air to avoid getting tased. When I looked back, the ladder was flat on the ground, and the man was gone. My partner asked what was going on, so I explained and begged him not to think I was crazy. Of course he didn't. He knew as well as I did that weird stuff like this happens more often than you'd think. We had to do a quick search for the guy, protocol, which I hated. I was praying we wouldn't find him. We didn't. I never saw anything like that again, and neither has anyone I've talked to. That guy was balancing on top of a ladder that wasn't leaning against anything. Maybe I met Houdini. When you see stuff like that, you make jokes, or you'll never move on. I'm really glad people are enjoying what I have to say. I'm not sure when I'll write more. Don't expect too much, because this is both tiring and cathartic. I'm thinking of sharing some of the less spooky stories and the ones that are just about humans being weird. We'll see. I should have known something was off when my supervisor called me in for an urgent adjustment to my usual shift. A bunch of people had recently bailed on the night schedule without much of an explanation, so it landed in my lap. At first, I wasn't exactly thrilled, but a small part of me was curious about what it'd be like to watch the park after dark. I guess I figured it'd be hours of quiet, broken up by the occasional hoot of an owl or flicker of a flashlight. So there I was, hiking up the tower's endless steps with a backpack full of coffee, energy drinks, and whatever courage I thought I had. The night air tasted cool, almost damp, and my boots crunched on gravel in a way that echoed, like I wasn't the only one listening. By the time I made it to the top, my legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to shrug it off. The tower's narrow wooden platform led me into a cramped room, with 3 walls of glass and a 4th wall hosting a door. There was a rickety bed, a tiny kitchen corner with a mini fridge and a microwave, plus a desk where the comm station sat blinking. I gave the radio a test. Static popped and hissed, but Donnie's voice came through eventually, saying something about how I'd better make friends with my flashlight because the moon was barely out. That bit of chatter steadied my nerves a bit, like, okay, at least I wasn't alone in the world. I stepped onto the balcony to get a proper look at my surroundings. Trees stretched in nearly every direction, their tops swaying faintly in the breeze. Off to my right was the lagoon, which looked more like a giant puddle choked with algae, lily pads, and random debris. The water sat way too still for my comfort. Meanwhile, the usual nighttime orchestra kicked up. Frogs, crickets, leaves rustling. It was almost soothing. I leaned over the balcony rail, scanning the area with binoculars. At first, I spotted nothing except a few moonlit clearings and shadows that I assumed were just logs or rocks. But near one of the ridges, I caught a glimpse of something pale, a shape that stood out against the dark. It looked suspiciously like a person, maybe a kid, wearing a blanket with two big circles where eyes might be. A ghost costume? In the middle of summer on federal land with no one else around. It threw me off so hard I nearly dropped the binoculars. I blinked, steadying the lenses again. This little ghost thing was still staring straight at the tower. Part of me wanted to believe it was just some leftover prank, but my gut churned in protest. I pulled out my handheld radio and called Donnie. Hey man, you in earshot? I don't even know how to say this. There's a kid dressed like a ghost on the ridge, right below the big dip in the tree line. Donnie sounded as confused as I was. A ghost? You serious? As a heart attack, I muttered. Could be some lost camper's kid, or maybe a runaway. Want to check it out before it becomes our problem? He sighed, but agreed. Fine, I'll head that way. Keep your eyes on them and let me know if they move. I caught a flicker of Donnie's flashlight weaving through the dark beneath me. He wasn't fast, but at least he was going in the right direction. I stayed on the balcony, sweeping the binoculars around, glancing back at the ridge every few seconds. The figure didn't move at all, like it was a statue with a bedsheet draped over it. Then, just as Donnie's light got close, his flashlight went out. The beam vanished so abruptly that I thought maybe my eyes tricked me. My radio let out a burst of static, and Donnie's voice cut off mid-sentence. In that exact same instant, the forest dropped every sound it had. Not one chirp, not one rustle. The hush felt alive, like I'd stepped into some bubble of silence. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I stumbled back into the tower, practically yanking the door off its hinges to close it. I tried calling Donnie again, nothing but static. My flashlight spotlighted the corners of the tower's room, and everything looked normal, but my nerves were lit up. I decided to go back outside, maybe yell into the darkness a few times. That was when I noticed a shape below, next to the first flight of steps. It looked like a woman, but impossibly tall and unnaturally thin, with a soaked dress clinging to her body. Her hair dangled in wet clumps, and she seemed to be bent at odd angles, like someone had tried putting a puzzle together the wrong way. She wasn't just dripping, she looked swollen with water, her skin a sickly bluish color that glistened in the moonlight. She lifted her face, eyes cloudy like murky pond water, and her mouth stretched open far too wide. A sound emerged, high-pitched, gurgling, way too loud to be human. My stomach flipped. Every cell in my body demanded I get the hell away from that door. I jumped back inside, locking the knob as fast as I could, though a flimsy piece of metal didn't feel like it'd stop anything. The radio squawked uselessly from the desk, providing zero comfort. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, trying to catch my breath, shining my flashlight at the door in case the woman decided to break it down. I could still sense her presence outside, but I had no idea if she'd left, or if she was crawling her way up to the balcony. The quiet returned in force, making every second stretch out. My hands trembled so hard that holding onto the flashlight was a challenge. And I kept thinking, if this is some weird joke, it's the sickest one anyone's ever pulled. But there was nothing funny in those eyes, or that sound echoing in my head. No, that had felt horribly real. I had a wild urge to bolt, but stepping outside again seemed suicidal. All I could do was stand in the darkness, alone, with no clue where Donnie was, or who, or what, was waiting by the stairs. I stood in front of that flimsy wooden door for what felt like an eternity. Every nerve in my body twisted tight. The tower had gone so deathly quiet that each breath felt like a shout. My flashlight beam wavered, lighting up only empty corners, and the reflection of my own terror in the glass panels. A tiny rational part of me insisted that I was safe inside, but the rest of my brain kept painting images of that drowned figure lunging through the door, those cloudy eyes rolling as she shrieked. Eventually, I forced myself to breathe deeper. 1 step back, 2 steps back, until I bumped into the kitchen counter. My hand slid across it, searching for anything solid, and I ended up clutching a long steel knife. My legs were ready to collapse under me, but I gripped the knife like a lifeline. I tried the handheld walkie-talkie again, pressing the button so hard my thumb ached. "Donnie?" I hissed. "Answer me, man, where are you?" Static, a faint pop, then another hiss. Nothing. I swung around, shining my flashlight behind me because I felt like something was creeping closer, only to land on the big cabinet in the corner. Something about it seemed different. The door was open? I knew it was sealed tight when I arrived, which gave me a vicious jolt of dread. Instinct forced me to raise the knife, as if expecting that watery nightmare woman to burst out. My heart thundered like an engine in my chest, and out stepped a little ghost, the same ragged sheet I'd seen on the ridge. That was enough to make me want to scream, but then the figure lifted it off, revealing Marvin, Donnie's son, sporting a grin so wide you'd think he'd scored the prank of the century. He also had a walkie in his hand, the green LED winking mockingly at me. I felt heat flush my face. "Marvin, what the hell?" Before the kid could answer, another voice crackled over the main radio on the desk. "There he is. How'd you do, Marv? He freak out?" Recognizing Donnie's voice, I stomped across the room and grabbed that radio. "You set me up," I yelled, so furious my voice went ragged. "Hiding your kid in my tower? Dressing him like some cheap little ghost?" Donnie, and a second voice, had to be his other son Joey, started howling with laughter. Apparently they'd been planning this for days. Snuck Marvin in here before my shift, made a show of him standing on the ridge, cut the power to Donnie's flashlight at the perfect moment. I'm sure they expected me to lose it. Mission accomplished. "Relax," Donnie cackled over the line. "It was just some harmless fun, man. Thought we'd welcome you to the graveyard shift in style." More snickers in the background. "How's your blood pressure?" I felt relief and anger crash together like thunderclouds in my gut. "You have no idea how close I was to stabbing." I stopped short, eyeing Marvin. He gave me a playful shrug, like he hadn't just watched me panic in genuine terror. I wanted to tear into Donnie, but there was still one problem overshadowing everything. "What about that thing outside?" My words choked in my throat. "Some waterlogged woman, or I don't know what. You can't tell me that was part of the plan, too." For a second the radio went silent. Then Donnie let out a short laugh, one that sounded less certain. "Wait, slow down. You think I hired an extra for your personal horror movie or something?" More awkward chuckles. "We only planned the ghost kid, that's it, no ladies in sight." His words hit me like a punch to the ribs. Even if they'd orchestrated a bunch of details to fool me, the shrieking creature I'd seen was way beyond a backyard prank. I couldn't shake the memory of that sallow, stretched skin. I had the insane urge to fling open the tower door just to see if she was still out there, but the possibility kept me rooted in place. Marvin must have seen the alarm still etched on my face because his grin faltered. Dad?" he said softly into his own walkie. "What if someone else is out here?" The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. After a moment Donnie tried to keep it light. "Look, maybe you saw a deer, or your eyes played tricks on you. It's late and you're wound up. We'll swing by once we finish up. Sound good?" I clicked off the radio without answering. My anger was draining, replaced by an old deep fear that stuck to my thoughts like tar. Part of me wanted to chase Marvin out with a scolding, but a stronger part, maybe the protective side, wouldn't risk letting him leave alone. Until this thing was explained or gone, I had zero trust in that black stretch of forest. I paced the tower, double-checking windows, and fiddling with the lock on the door. It felt so thin, like a stiff wind could knock it down. Meanwhile, the night outside remained too quiet for comfort. Marvin looked just as jumpy as me now, hugging his arms close to his body like the joke wasn't so funny anymore. Time crawled. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement outside, a branch shifting, or a swirl of mist over the lagoon. But I never saw that gaunt figure again. It was almost worse not knowing if it was still lurking beneath the tower. At one point, a faint screech echoed from somewhere in the woods, and I nearly tripped over my own feet spinning around to face the door. Marvin squeaked, then tried to laugh it off, but his eyes were wide. By the time the first streaks of dawn arrived, I felt shredded. My chest was tight, my muscles stiff from clenching. Donnie came through on the walkie once more to say something about making the rounds, but I barely registered it. All I could think was that if I had to do another shift here, locked in this fishbowl, I'd lose my mind. Jokes were one thing, but that woman's milky gaze was not something you faked with store-bought makeup. I couldn't explain it, and Donnie wouldn't listen. That left me with one real choice. "All right, Marvin, time to go," I said quietly, and escorted him down the tower steps in the fragile early light. The two of us jumped at every rustle or bump. I was armed with that kitchen knife, feeling ridiculous but unable to relax. The lagoon looked almost peaceful in daylight, but I was too on edge to appreciate it. By the end of that endless descent, my mind was made up. The moment I got the chance, I'd inform the higher-ups. I wasn't staying on nights, not another hour. Let them call me paranoid. Whatever I'd seen out there, it wasn't just a trick of the dark. Something in those woods had noticed me, and I had no intention of sticking around for round two. Marvin and I trudged toward the ranger station, the first rays of sun hitting the trees in a washed-out glow. Part of me expected to see that soggy figure trailing behind us, but every time I looked over my shoulder, it was only empty space. Maybe that was even scarier. It meant it could still be anywhere. I'd always believed the night shift was nothing but quiet hours. But nothing from this point forward would ever feel normal again. When I glanced back at the tower, all I saw was a lonely shape against the morning sky and the silent, unmoving lagoon. But I remembered that scream. I remembered the hush that followed it too, and I wondered if maybe it was the woods themselves sending a warning. Some things aren't meant to be watched after dark. At least not by anyone who wants to make it home sane. I knew the night was off to a strange start the minute I checked in. The ranger station, which normally felt like a second home to me, seemed smaller and lonelier than usual. Even the warm glow from the overhead lights couldn't chase away the gloom pouring in from the windows. I stepped inside, figuring I'd see Pat, Marcus, and Dana gathered around the battered table in the corner, trading jokes while we waited out another quiet shift. Instead, I found them pacing around, each one fiddling with equipment or rechecking logs. It was my turn to do a final walkthrough outside. Usually I enjoy strolling around under the moonlight, scoping out the tree line for raccoons or wandering deer. Tonight, the moon was hidden behind roiling clouds, and the path beyond the station was pitch black. The wind whipped across the roof, making the beams groan. I half wondered if the entire structure would shake itself apart. After a few minutes of testing the locks and listening for anything unusual, I stepped back inside, my jacket dripping with cold dew. Pat gave me this look that said, "All good out there?" And I nodded, but I didn't really feel certain. Before I could settle at the desk, Dana spoke up. She's usually the practical one, never letting gossip or superstitions rattle her, but her expression was guarded. She asked if we'd ever heard rumors about the Phantom of Hollow Grove. Marcus let out a nervous laugh, but Pat's face turned serious. Dana explained how this old local legend had been passed around since before any of us were hired, a name tied to unexplained vanishings, especially when the moon was at its fullest. She didn't sound like she was spinning a campfire story. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she was remembering something unsettling. The station lights flickered just then. It might have been a hiccup in the power, but it made every single nerve in me go on alert. Even the fireplace, which usually made the room cozy, seemed to cast weird shadows across the walls. Pat ventured to the window and peered out. The glass was flecked with condensation, making it tough to see anything but vague outlines of trees shifting in the wind. Marcus, normally the easygoing one, was already double-checking the radio, as if he expected to need backup at any second. I felt this nagging urge to go outside again, to scan the perimeter and be absolutely sure we were alone. Yet the idea of venturing past the door gave me pause. I remembered all the times I'd teased guests about being nervous in the dark, and suddenly I wondered if I'd been a fool to brush off what the woods might conceal. Something about the night put a knot in my chest. I kept seeing movement in the corners of my eyes, just enough to unsettle me. Every time I turned, there was nothing but old walls and dusty corners. Dana cleared her throat and said we should try to keep it together, that sometimes these shifts set our imaginations on overdrive. She kept talking about how the stories of Hollow Grove weren't just for spooking tourists. There was a grain of truth buried in them, enough to make even skeptics look over their shoulders now and then. I wanted to brush it off, but I couldn't. Not with the wind howling outside like it had a purpose. Not with the odd quiet in the station, even though the four of us were there. And definitely not with the sense that something, or someone, was beyond our beam of light, standing just out of sight, waiting. We didn't speak for a while after that. We just sat there, each lost in our own thoughts, half expecting a knock on the door, or a flicker of movement in the dark. When we finally did say anything, it was barely above a whisper, as if we were afraid of who else might be listening. Dana had a faraway look that practically begged us to lean in. I could see she wasn't sure if she really wanted to rehash whatever was sitting on her mind, but she let out a shaky sigh and began. "Couple years back," she said quietly, "I was finishing up a shift here. The weather had been horrible for days, relentless rain, all the trails basically sludge. Nobody was bothering to visit, which meant I had to keep an eye out by myself. That night I was still new enough to think every single bump outside could be a stray animal, except the sounds I heard weren't from an animal." She paused, gazing at the table. None of us moved. Even Pat, who usually tries to crack a joke and break tension, just watched her in silence. Dana went on about how she'd spent the whole evening hauling fallen branches off the paths. When the sun set, she ducked inside, thinking she'd wait out the storm and call it a night. The wind was raging so hard the station windows rattled every few seconds. Finally, her stomach growled, so she ordered from the nearest diner. Old Henry, a delivery guy everyone in town knew, pulled up half an hour later. She stepped out onto the porch to grab her food. "I remember how dark it felt," she said, rubbing her hands together like she could still feel the chill. There was this dampness that wouldn't let go. The diner's headlights cut across the station's walls, but everything else was swallowed by black sky. She tried to keep it casual, chatting with Henry about the rain, how he managed to drive in such miserable conditions. But he kept glancing over her shoulder. Finally he blurted that somebody was standing among the twisted oaks near the fence. Dana saw nothing at first, just the silhouette of trees shifting in the wind. Then she made out a shape, thin, ragged, like it was half-crouched behind a trunk. That's when they both heard something like a hushed voice telling them to go. "It didn't feel like a threat," Dana admitted, tapping her fingers on the table. "It was more like someone warning us, but I couldn't begin to guess who, or what, was trying to help." She said the fear ramped up quick. She and Henry jumped into his car without saying a word, not caring about anything but getting down that mud-slick road. The tires spun, kicking up gravel and water, and they raced off. After a couple miles, Henry pulled over, and they just sat there, shaking from adrenaline. Neither one could fully believe what they'd seen. Dana spent the next minutes debating how to explain taking off mid-shift, but it turned out she didn't have to. By that time, she said, the station security system had already caught a group dressed in dark hooded coats smashing the door in. They roamed inside for about 5 minutes, rummaging around with this eerie calm. They didn't steal a thing. It was more like they were inspecting the place, as if searching for something. Then they walked out into the storm like none of it mattered, leaving behind a few soaked footprints and a lot of unanswered questions. The cops called me in, Dana said, lowering her voice, and all they could figure was a botched robbery. But who breaks down a door just to poke around? They never left a single fingerprint. We all glanced around, half expecting to see those hooded figures lurking right outside our windows. Dana's story was unnerving enough, but she wasn't done. She mentioned the little wooden bundle she discovered later, lying in the corner near the supply closet. A pile of twigs bound with a strip of ribbon, so tightly knotted that she had to use a knife to cut it. No one in the department could explain it, and eventually, someone just tossed it in a box to be forgotten. That was the same day the break-in happened, she said. So call me paranoid if you want, but I've spent every day since wondering why those people came in, and who they really were. Maybe it has something to do with all the old stories about this place. Or maybe we just got unlucky, but either way, I still can't shake the feeling it's not over. She finished talking, and the little hum of our electrical devices was the only noise left. I was imagining Henry's headlights reflecting on a figure half hidden by trunk and branch, waving them away like it was granting mercy. Dana blinked a few times, as if waking from a bad dream, and that's when I realized her story had changed the air in the room. We weren't just rangers killing time on another routine shift. We were 4 uneasy souls perched in a remote station, with something out there in the darkness. A presence that might help us, or harm us. And we had no way of knowing which. We all fell silent after Dana finished her story, like we were waiting for the shadows outside to respond. Pat broke the tension first, clearing his throat and suggesting a perimeter check. It should have been routine, but every step felt heavy. I volunteered to team up with Dana while Pat and Marcus swept the back. Outside, the air was colder than before. The station's floodlight didn't reach far, so most of the yard was barely visible. I noticed how the wind had died down. It made every noise echo, like the forest was an empty stage waiting for an actor to appear. Dana and I started circling around the side, flashlights bouncing off twisted branches and soggy undergrowth. I tried to calm my breathing, telling myself we were just being thorough. Yet it felt like we were trespassing on something's territory. A few yards from the storage shed, our beams picked up footprints, barefoot, pressed into the mud. They veered in a weird, meandering path toward the tree line. I glanced at Dana, who knelt and prodded one of the prints with her fingers. They were fresh enough to still glisten with moisture. Goosebumps prickled along my arms. Nobody sane would walk around barefoot at this hour. Suddenly, a branch snapped in the distance, louder than it should have been. My flashlight swung toward the tree line, finding nothing but dark shapes. Then I spotted a tiny wooden figure perched on a fallen log. A crude stick person tied with a thread the color of dried blood. For a moment, I could have sworn it tilted its head at me. I knew that was impossible, but it felt real. Dana approached slowly, her steps careful. She reached out and lifted the figure. Up close it was damp and smelled faintly of rotting leaves. Some kind of totem or warning. We heard murmurs then, hushed voices carrying through the hush of the night. I flicked off my flashlight, signaling Dana to do the same. Through the gloom, we made out movement, silhouettes shifting among the trees, maybe 4 or 5. They moved in a rhythmic way, as if following a practiced formation. No flashlights, no phones, just bodies and shadows. We crouched, our hearts pounding, thoughts racing about what we'd do if they headed our way. Pat and Marcus stumbled upon us, nearly causing me to jump. Marcus mouthed, "We saw them too," pointing toward another patch of darkness. We decided in silent agreement to back up to the station. As we retreated, I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced we were being watched. But I caught only faint outlines flickering through the trees. Inside, we locked the doors, drew the blinds, and shoved a heavy table against the main entrance. The logs in the fireplace popped, scattering embers in a sudden burst. Usually that sound is comforting, but this time it felt more like a warning shot. No one sat. We hovered near the windows, peeking out through narrow gaps in the blinds. The station smelled of damp clothes and fear, if fear can have a smell. Pat wanted to call for backup, but Dana hesitated. What if they're gone by the time anyone arrives? We'll look paranoid. She had a point. I remembered the story she told us, the unanswered questions left behind after the hooded group trashed the station. If they were the same ones prowling outside, they'd likely vanish as soon as they heard sirens. Time dragged. The wind picked up again, rattling the siding. My eyes burned from staring out the window, half expecting to see faces pressed against the glass. The phone lines were spotty this far out. If the lines went down, we'd be stranded without any communication. Marcus joked about how we should have transferred to a beach post, but the humor fell flat. We all knew we were in over our heads. Hours later the forest remained silent, like it was holding its breath for something worse. We agreed to wait for first light before making any bold moves. Whatever lurked outside, it felt like it was waiting too. The four of us ended up around the fireplace, jumpy at every twig snap or gust of wind. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but we all knew the night wasn't done testing us. As the clock inched closer to dawn, we heard the faintest scrape against the back wall, like someone running a blade or a rock along the wood. I stood, flashlight trembling in my hand, but the noise stopped. No footsteps, no break-in, but they'd reminded us they were out there. We realized morning might not bring any safety at all, but for now, it was the only hope we had. We took turns peering through the windows, watching for shapes among the trees, each minute feeling like an hour. There was a shared, unspoken sense that whatever happened tonight was just the prelude. And as we huddled by the sputtering fire, none of us felt particularly eager to see what came next. I made my decision before sunrise. We all did. By the time the gray light started filtering through the station's grime-smeared windows, our nerves were shredded. Every noise from the night before still seemed to echo in the back of my mind. The shifting silhouettes, those footprints in the mud, that faint scrape against the wall. None of us had slept. We were running on pure adrenaline and dread. Pat asked if anyone wanted breakfast, trying to mask the tension with a sliver of normalcy, but no one had much appetite. Marcus simply shook his head, staring at the barrier we'd set against the door. Dana, who had always been our rock, looked like a stranger. Her eyes were dark, hollow circles. She forced a small smile but didn't say anything. I realized we'd each reached the end of our tether. We peeled back the blinds to watch the first rays of morning cut through the forest, turning the nearest treetops into a dull silhouette. Though the night had receded, it hadn't taken that malevolent feeling with it. I still sensed we were being watched, maybe from the shadows, maybe from beyond the battered fence line. That unshakable dread was enough to convince me I couldn't keep doing this. Marcus packed his gear in a frantic, clumsy way, almost as if he thought we needed to evacuate immediately. I couldn't blame him. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing it with whatever personal items I could find, spare clothes, an old mug, a few dog-eared field guides. None of us spoke more than a few words, but there was a shared understanding. We were done. For good. It was like the forest itself had finally broken our last bit of resolve. Pat tore down the makeshift barricade, tossing the table aside with a grunt. I'm not sticking around, he mumbled, blinking away the fatigue that clung to all of us. I'll do the paperwork, whatever it takes, but I'm not coming back here. Dana stayed silent, but her eyes darted around the station one final time, almost as if she was memorizing every crack and splinter. I could only imagine what she was feeling, given her past run-ins with whatever lurked out there. Then she swallowed hard and whispered, "Let's go." We stepped outside, the morning air chilling our lungs. Instead of the usual dawn chorus of birds, there was near complete silence. It was as if the entire forest held its breath, waiting to see if we'd actually leave. A low haze lingered around the tree roots, and the wind hissed through damp leaves. That creeping unease wouldn't let up. I felt like eyes were drilling holes in the back of my head. At the trucks, we didn't even try to pretend we'd come back. Normally there'd be talk of the next shift or a reminder to lock up carefully. This time we just piled in, turned keys, and drove away. No glances in the rearview mirror. We knew what we were leaving behind. It wasn't just the station. It was the memory of that horrific night, the footprints in the mud, the indecipherable murmurs among the trees, and the strange totems that hinted we were in over our heads. As we hit the main road, I felt a glimmer of relief mixed with guilt. Part of me worried about the next person who'd fill our roles, but I knew I couldn't stay there. The forest had become too loaded with shadows and unanswered questions. We pulled up to the Central Ranger office later that morning. The woman at the front desk looked startled as we handed over our resignations in near unison. Pat's words tumbled out, shaky but resolute. "We're done. No more nights out there. No more of whatever's in those woods." Nobody asked a single follow-up question. Maybe they'd heard rumors. Maybe they saw our pale faces and realized we'd seen enough. All I know is we gathered our belongings from our lockers without a glance back. I heard Dana quietly mutter that if anyone tried to make her go back, she'd drive 3 states away before she set foot in another forest. Marcus just nodded and patted her shoulder. We left that day, each in our own car, driving away from the ranger service and the job we'd once loved. Even though I was relieved, there was a tiny voice in my head warning me those woods wouldn't forget us. Sometimes, when I'm alone and thinking too much, I picture the bare footprints and those hooded shapes slipping back beneath the branches. There's a sense of finality to it, but also a lingering question mark. Did we escape, or just postpone the inevitable? Either way, I've got no intention of going back to find out. And if anyone were to ask, I'd tell them the same thing. Some places aren't meant to be understood or conquered. Some forests can keep their secrets, and I'll keep my distance, forever. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope tonight's stories kept you company in the dark. Sleep well, and if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe. Good night, and see you in the next one.